why nurseries charge what they charge, and why so many nursery owners feel frustrated with the government funding. In today's video, we're going to break down how nurseries set their fees, why babies cost more to care for, and why government funding doesn't often reflect the reality of those costs. By the end of this video, you'll have a clearer understanding of how nursery fees work and why the system can be so difficult to navigate. And stay tuned to the end, where I'll show you how understanding these dynamics can help you to manage your nursery finances more effectively. Plus, I'll explain how I can support you with the process. But before we get into all of that, welcome to the channel. Welcome to the channel Open Nursery with myself, Kurt Liania, where I support you to open, run, and grow your own childcare business. Over the years, I've helped many nursery owners understand the complexities of a nursery business, from navigating the Office of Registration process to setting nursery fees. But today, we're going to go over a common issue that many new nursery owners struggle to grasp. Why are so many nursery owners complaining about the government funding? We'll talk about how nurseries charge their fees, how they manage their costs with regards to staffing and ratios, how they attempt to keep their fees reasonable for parents, and we'll discuss why the government funding doesn't always reflect these costs, which is a huge frustration for many current nursery owners. But before we get into that, make sure you hit that subscribe button and that bell notification so you don't miss out on future videos that can help you to run your nursery successfully. But let's dive into it. Let's start by discussing the key differences in terms of babies and preschoolers when it comes to the costs. This is where things can get tricky, and it's important to understand why nurseries charge more for babies than they do for preschoolers, but still comparably charge less for babies in terms of their costs. The main thing that determines the cost of a child at your setting is their age and their staffing ratios. In the UK, nurseries are required to maintain staffing ratios of 1 to 3 for babies, which is children aged under 2, meaning that for every 3 babies that you have, you need 1 member of staff. For children aged 3 to 5, the ratios are 1 to 8, which means that 1 adult can care for up to 8 children of this age. This significantly impacts the costs because babies need more staff for a smaller group, which will instantly impact the overall cost of the care. Babies also require more space and resources. Ofsted and other regulatory bodies in the UK require you to provide more space for babies than they do for preschoolers. Plus, you need more resources for things like cribs or cots, changing areas, additional safety features, soft play areas, and more development toys catered to their age group. All of this increases the cost for babies at nurseries. So if you were to charge for babies at their actual cost, the amount you would charge for them would be much higher than you would charge for a preschooler, which is a child aged 3 to 5. To make this clearer, let's use an example of the cost for a baby and a preschooler. Let's say you have a baby place that costs you £250 per week to run, which includes things like staff salaries, the resources, and the space requirements. Remembering babies need 2.66 more staff than a preschooler would need. So to cover the cost of this £250, you might charge £300 per week. But remember, you still have to cover the cost of additional things like your rent, additional staff like managers, cleaners, cooks, who aren't counted in ratio. So charging the £300 would basically be breaking even and wouldn't really represent the cost of having a baby at your nursery. Now compare this to a preschooler. The preschooler's cost will be much less, so that preschooler might cost you just £75 to £90 per week. However, you as a nursery would still typically charge £250 to £260 per week for this child. This is significantly more than the cost of actually caring for the preschooler. But here's the key point. Even though nurseries charge £260 for the preschooler, they are still charging less than they would for the baby at £300. But the reason for this pricing model is simple. If nurseries charge what babies actually cost, it will be financially unfeasible for parents to afford this. Nursery fees for babies would end up being £500 to £600 per week, over double what the average fee is now. So nurseries charge a higher fee in comparison for preschoolers in order to offset these costs. So in the example given, nurseries might charge £300 for babies but then charge £250 for preschoolers. This pricing structure allows for nurseries to balance the books while still providing an affordable fee for parents, allowing a fee for preschoolers to cover the cost of looking after the babies. The reason why nurseries don't just target preschoolers though is because generally once you secure a baby place, that baby will be with you long term. So although you're not making money at the beginning from a baby, once they start hitting toddler ages and preschoolers, you expect to start making the money back from them then. And it's difficult to start just from a preschooler, as many of those children will already be in nurseries. And once a parent finds a nursery that they trust, they're unlikely to switch. Now here's where it gets interesting, as a lot of nursery owners don't fully understand this. business, and they don't fully understand why they charge what they do. They simply copy their competitors' pricing model. They assume that because everyone's charging similar amounts, it must be the right way to do it. But the truth is, if you don't fully understand the reasons behind your pricing structure, you can end up making some big mistakes. For example, you might pack your nursery with babies, enabling you to hit full capacity, which in your head would make you feel that you should be making a good profit and enough to survive. You'll look at your nursery books and see that all your places are full, but if you understand this, you will know that you've relied too heavily on an age group that doesn't generate enough revenue for you to cover your costs. Yes, babies cost more and you charge more, but you wouldn't have made enough from the preschool age who are up to balance out your pricing structure. Now, if you are aware of this and you're looking for more long-term goals, so you know in a few years you'll have a nursery full of preschoolers, then you can kind of weather the storm for those few years. But if you haven't planned for this, then you could end up losing money. But without enough preschoolers to offset your costs, in this example, your profits won't be enough to sustain your business long term. This is why understanding your fees and cost structure is so crucial. If you're relying too heavily on one age group and not charging enough for the other age group to cover the difference, you might find yourself in a situation where your nursery is full but not financially viable. This is where many nurseries run into problems, which is exactly why it's so important to get a clear picture of how pricing works for the different age groups. Running and owning a nursery can be very profitable, and understanding how the pricing structure works is key to making a profitable nursery. But now that we've established how and why nurseries charge what they do, let's look at how government funding fits into all of this. Nursery owners often complain about the government funding, which is underfunded, but it's important to understand how the funding is calculated. From September, the government will be providing 30 hours funding for working parents who have children aged 9 months and older. But the key issue with the government funding is that the government funding only takes into account the actual cost of preschoolers and doesn't consider the adjustments that nurseries make to balance out the higher cost of babies. This is where the biggest issue arose, especially when there was only funding for 3-year-olds previously. Governments would pay nurseries less than what they actually charge for parents, meaning they're getting less per hour by offering the government funding. The government funding for 3 and 4-year-olds is based on the cost of a preschooler, which, as we've established, is much lower than the cost of caring for a baby. So for example, if the cost of caring for a preschooler in your area is £75 per week, then this is what the government will reimburse nurseries for this fee with an additional amount to maintain profitability, which ends up being less than what nurseries will typically charge. So now that nurseries are getting funding for babies, the government are doing the same for them. So in comparison, a baby in your area might cost you £200 per week. So the government will reimburse you based on this amount, again with an additional amount on top of this to enable you to make a profit, which typically ends up being more than you would charge for a baby place. This causes a mismatch between what you might charge for babies and what you might charge for preschoolers and what the government actually give you. Before nurseries received funding for babies, this meant that nurseries would lose out a lot when accepting funding for preschoolers. This frustration arose based on what I explained, because nurseries charge less than they should for babies to make childcare more affordable, but they were receiving funding for preschoolers that didn't take this into account. This forced many nursery owners to charge top-up fees or fees in addition to the funding to help manage their income. Now things have changed because of the rollout of funding to babies and toddlers, which means that government funding does work out better than some people might think, as they will now be receiving more for their baby place from government funding than they would what they charge parents. However, managing this funding still presents a challenge, as there are still complications with how funding is split for the different age groups, which creates difficulty when you're planning and budgeting, especially since nurseries essentially receive 2 different fees for babies and for preschoolers. So although the government has extended funding and we will be getting more for our baby places, it still doesn't fully address the challenges that nurseries face. For preschoolers, the funding remains less than what nurseries charge. So for example, if a nursery charges £8 per hour, the government might reimburse roughly £5 to £7 per hour depending on your area, which doesn't cover the full cost of running a nursery, which is why nurseries charge a top-up fee on top of this. So for babies, the funding that you might expect for babies could be anywhere from £10 to £12 per hour, which is more than the £8 to £9 that nurseries might charge for a baby place. However, the complication lies when trying to balance the books, because nurseries will still have to charge less for babies in comparison to their costs in order to keep childcare affordable for parents. This is where it gets tricky, the mismatch in government funding versus the fees that we charge, as you end up receiving 2 different fees for the different age groups. So you might receive £8 per hour from fees for a preschool place, whereas just £6 to £7 per hour from government funding. On the other hand, you might receive £11 to £12 per hour for a baby place from the government and £9 from parents. So for example, if you're stretching your funding, 2 out of the 5 days that a preschooler attends your nursery, you might receive £5 to £7 per hour from the government funding, whereas the other 3 to 5 days, you might receive £8 from them from the parents' fees, meaning you're receiving 2 different fees, one from the government, one from the parents. On the other hand, with babies, for 2 out of the 5 days, you might receive £11 to £12 per hour from the government funding and be charging £9 per hour for the other 3 out of 5 days. This makes it extremely difficult to budget properly and know which age groups you should be focusing on, as you essentially have 2 different fee structures to manage at the same time. Previously, you would try to overload with preschoolers, as this is where you'd make the most money from. But now with the government funding, you really have to sit down more and look at what works best for your nursery. This financial balancing act means nurseries need to carefully plan their age groups and be more strategic about how they allocate spaces for babies and for preschoolers. It's not as simple as just filling up with baby places or with preschool places and expecting to break even and make a profit. You need to consider how much funding you're receiving for each age group, how much you're charging parents for non-funded hours, and how to manage the overall capacity of your nursery so that you're not running at a loss by relying too heavily on one age group. Now, I mentioned about stretch funding briefly, which I'm not going to cover in this video, but it's important to note that whether you're offering stretch funding or not, you need to be aware of how this affects your funding. So for example, if you're stretching your hours over the year, you're getting less per week per child, but stretched over a longer period. Non-stretched hours, you're getting more per week per child, but they only last during term time, which can affect your cash flow during different times of the year. This adds another layer of complexity to your planning. If you're not aware of how to manage both or which one will work best for your nursery, you could undercharging for one group and not get enough funding to cover your costs. For those just entering the nursery field, it's important to understand the financial dynamics that go into nursery fees, knowing that most nurseries charge more for preschoolers to offset the true costs, and why government funding doesn't match the reality of nursery costs will help you make better financial decisions when setting your nursery fees. Understanding this will help you to manage your financials more effectively. You need to set your fees around the reality of the costs involved, charging appropriately for both babies and preschoolers, whilst also understanding how government funding fits into the equation. As you can see, managing nursery finances, especially when it comes to government funding, can be complicated. Understanding how fees are structured, how to balance the cost of babies and preschoolers, and how to use government funding effectively is crucial to running a successful nursery. If you want help navigating these complexities and creating a financial plan that works for your nursery, I'm here to guide you. Click the link that's in the description or that will appear on the screen shortly, where you can drop me a message to let me know your plans, and I'll see how I can best support you, whether it's with finances or any aspect or area of setting up your nursery. We'll figure out how I can best support you to turn your dreams to reality. But before you go over there, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe for more insights on nursery business management. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. I want to thank you for watching. I do hope this video has cleared up some of the complexities behind nursery fees and the government funding. Whether you're opening your first nursery or managing an established one, understanding these financial dynamics will help you succeed. On the screen now is the link for you to get in contact with me, plus a video that YouTube thinks you'll find useful. So once you drop me a message through that link, feel free to watch another video. I'll see you on the next one. God bless.